Well, it's a fascinating subject. I really hesitate to go in too much in depth to it because of how many avenues it can take us down, and also my work is still. I'm still working on a DVD and work on this. I've done lots of classes in it and other talks and writings, but it's something that is an aspect of the psychological work. Looking into basically. All I can say in reference to what people might be familiar with what I've already done is that this is a situation in which it arises out of the concept of the inauthentic self. We've talked about this in other writings and presentations about man living an inauthentic life, and of course there's different degrees of inauthentic life. It's like a spectrum. Some people are getting it together, they're not so bad. They're looking deeply at different reasons, you see, why they're not in selfhood, why they don't have strong boundaries, why life isn't working for them, and they're getting with it, and they're progressing, and every day is a new day of adventure and discovery. So they're not quite as bad, They're looking for the authentic life, which is, of course, connected to a man's selfhood, the purpose and reason of why he's here. And then, as I've shown in my work on pathology and how it works with the conspiracy, you have the other end of the spectrum of basically the self-murdered person. This is somebody who has no spirit at all, going not with a religious idea or interpretation of spirit, but with a psychological idea of spirit, which is that spirit is not something you're given at birth. It's not something you come into this world with. It's something you create for yourself through the experiences that you have. Soul, spirit, is something you develop yourself. It's like that you bring alive from within yourself. You're given the spark of life by the Almighty intelligence, but spirit is something you gain from your experiences here in this world. Just as everything else in your body grows from a natal state into maturity, so does your spiritual self. It's not just installed at the moment of birth and there you have it. But unfortunately, there are people who either because of again, terrible violations that happen to them in this life, or just some other warped psychological reasoning, you see, are self-murdered. And we have these emotionally self-murdered people in their millions walking around. In fact, if we really showed the statistics, we'd probably be horrified at just how many people, you see, are not living in they're not alive in a moral or spiritual sense. They just have the mask, they just have the persona. And then these individuals are very adept at living off the energies and light of other people. So that's why the term vampirism has been used. It's quite an accurate term, actually, in many ways. And it also ties into this whole idea of the figures that we find at the top of the hierarchy, who would be so toxic, like we mentioned in the previous interview we did, that the problem with these people is that, see, they're also self-murdered, they're also toxic, and therefore they require not only the false religion as a front, as a cover, as some sort of sham to hang on to give the, just like you put marzipan on a cake, just like you put a false mask on somebody, they require this because they don't have any of the real light. They don't have any of the real spiritual energy, so they require a sort of counterfeit camouflage, just like the tiger hides in the long grass. And also they very much require status. They require the power that they have over other people, not power over the self, because they don't have any power over the self. There is no selfhood. The self has been murdered, self-murdered. These are deeply self-sadistic people, and therefore, they require the outer trappings of control and power. And of course, it goes thousands of years ago back to the Taoists and Taoists and the great philosophers. They always spoke about that the man who has true power doesn't require any control over other people. So the very manic need for these people to set up these exploitatory edifices, as we said, corporations are psychopathic, meaning the controllers, the people who create all sorts of corporations. I believe there's a great deal of psychopathy behind these different fraternal orders. Maybe not the street level masonry, but certainly on the higher levels. My goodness, if you study these orders as much as I have, it goes without saying that there's a psychopathy there. You see? So it just like any corporation, just like any organization, and just like any individual who has great status, who absolutely, literally will jump through hoops to have the world bestow physical awards, physical medals, physical honors, and so on and so forth. You see, physical wealth, because they have no wealth within. So you also meet this on the more, let's say, street level, humble level of people walking around you. And of course, you won't notice it. These are people, you can't pull out a meter with a nice little needle that will, like some sort of, tricorder out of Star Trek or something like that, where happily and beautifully and luckily, Mr. Spock will be able to go, watch out, Captain, psychic vampire loose. And everybody can have their, boundaries up. Unfortunately, people are married to such individuals. People work beside them every day of their lives. People give birth to such creatures. People have them as neighbors. People have them as superiors. And unfortunately, there is no meter. And the only meter that you have is your own intuition and your own deductive abilities to observe them very closely to find out, okay, is there something slightly different here? But of course, this kind of knowledge, you see, is very absent in the world. And we're still at a sort of a spinner rack level of psychology when it comes to analyzing these kinds of people. Psychology does know about them to a degree, but it is very paltry. It's not in depth yet, not too much. And so there's a lot we need to know about this kind of, person, and how they might operate, and how this kind of vampirism works on all of its different levels. And this is what, education I'm committed to. Very fascinating subject. And as I said, we do have a meter. We do have the ability. These people will betray themselves, but we have to be observant of that fact. And in the study of the psychic vampire, we're actually studying humanity. Because, as I said, it's deconstructive. Once you understand what a human being is not, you have a greater understanding of maybe what a human being is. By the analysis of what it is not, all the various corrupt forms, you see, all the various counterfeit forms, once those are analyzed and discarded, like we said in the previous interview, once you've eliminated the untrue, you'll be left with a sense of the true. And this is essential in some of these studies that have to do with the inauthentic life, with the systems of control, tying in exactly to what we said last time about the inability of a psychopath to see hierarchy. Well, you see, the psychopath will simply not see it. So no matter where they look, they will see hierarchy. And that is already, and the fact that they're adamant about it is the sign of their dementia. So it's just like a person who's got Parkinson's. It's no point expecting them to be able to, hold the knife and fork. Unfortunately, the body functions just don't allow for that. So in exactly the same way as a physical ailment will preclude somebody from climbing the stairs or cooking a meal, or bathing themselves. So in exactly the same way as a mental disease is the same sort of, hindrance. It's just not possible. For a person with one leg, to beat the 4-minute mile. It's just not possible. So in a physical disability, we understand it, but with a mental disability, we don't understand it. But we need to start understanding that people with that kind of a disability are not going to be clear and deep in their understanding of the nature of the universe. It's simply not possible. Their understanding of life, their projections upon other people, their understandings of other people's motives, their understanding of how the systems of the world work are going to be deeply flawed. These are not rational people, and I don't care how many university degrees they happen to have. That has no bearing upon the facts at all. If a person is demented, they can still be intelligent enough to jump through hoops to get some worldly awards. In fact, this is what you often find with people who are megalomaniacs. They do possess enough skill to be able to, manipulate people and to go along to get along in the school situation, or maybe win awards politically, you see, so that they end up getting power, because these people want power more than any other thing. So they're willing to sacrifice, they're willing to do hard work, they're willing to manipulate and worm their way up, until they have an actual sense of power. This turns them on. This is very, very important to most of the potentates and the criminal syndicates of the world, you see, who operate in such a sadistic manner, not caring how much genocide, how much mayhem, how much misery they bring to the world. Again, if we do not know how to isolate a psychopath, that's about as good as not being able to identify a mad tiger hiding in the long grass who's ready to just eat all your sheep and kill your children and abduct and murder and just go mad. Some wild, crazed out beast. You're in exactly the same predicament. And this is unfortunately where we find ourselves today.
There was something that you pointed out in the DVD also, almost in connection with that, as far as where we could be headed in terms of, this control apparatus, which is one, the annihilation of consciousness. Because you mentioned the difference of the authentic versus the inauthentic. And with the annihilation of conscience, you talked about the usage of pharmaceuticals and medicine. And as you were describing, when I was viewing the DVD, and as you were describing this particular aspect of the presentation, I kept thinking, because there was one segment where you had a clip from a talk show where a husband was saying that they were talking about Prozac. And the husband was talking with the host in connection to his wife. He says, well, isn't your wife better? She doesn't get angry anymore? He says, yes. Well, isn't she more manageable and more agreeable with you? He said, yes. But he looked at her and said, but that's still not my wife. And so you see in that incident a prime illustration of the annihilation, or a sense of inauthenticity of a person's individuality. Talk about the usage of pharmaceuticals, which you also fused with alchemy, and how you made those connections even with our past historical characters in the rock industry, such as Morrison, Hendrix, and Osborne, and others.
Well, yes, I remember that scene, and I must say it's one of the most moving scenes both me and Henrik and anyone that we've sat with and watched the DVD through, both mechanically in order to make the show, and also later as just sitting and watching it objectively. That scene is horrifying and yet incredibly illuminating, the scene that you just referred to, and I'm glad you brought it up, because you see, and even if you watch the mannerisms of the wife who is on the drug, you see this incredibly effervescent, confident, happy person. Yet the husband, is thinking that where's the real wife, So in other words, what he's got here is something that conforms on paper to a societal model. This model, which is the theme of our work in the Architects of Control, where did that model come from? Who has contrived to create this societal model of what is normal? Is it the schools? Is it how they have, set that up? And is it the media in which they've given us these models? And you're quite right, we'll get to the idea of who these rock star models are and how that's all contrived as well. And not all, but a great deal of it being contrived. But yes, is there something about the fact that we now are living in the simulacra, becoming more and more artificial, having Big Brother dictate who and what we can be, what we have in our relationship to our emotions and our relationships to other people, and the political correctness that's all around, which takes away our own common sense? All of these factors, you see, that move us towards this sort of perfect man, this perfect new man concept. And then if you fit that model, he or she fits that model on paper, and all aspects of true individuality, all aspects of true imaginative expression, unless of course it's commercially viable, are erased and eroded, and you fit this nice little pre-packaged, basically artificial model, then you're considered normal. And of course, let's not even get into the whole thing of this horrendous, concept of the modern world in which it's broken, fix it. And meaning that, you fix it with pharmaceuticals, you fix it with this superficial topical stuff without going to the root of why all these maladies arise, all of this. But even if you fit this model on paper, then you're considered normal. But as many of the post-Freudians like Arno Gruen and other psychologists have shown, especially R.D. Laing and Wilhelm Reich, so many of these people have shown, even Freud himself showed, that look, if society is abnormal, if society is neurotic, if society is violent and abnormal, or by your conforming to these models, then aren't you conforming to an abnormal model? And is that why we have abnormal people, abnormal emotional people, abnormal intellectual people, abnormally morally walking around in the world? And religion is definitely having a hard time trying to then pick up the pieces and make sure that people remain within a moral framework. And of course that gets weaker and weaker and weaker all the time. Or religion has to become even more and more, you see, in its own way, rigid and uncompromising in order to do something about this tremendous falling off, you see. So one thing affects the other, you see. It's all part of a fractal. You can't affect one bead on the thread without, affecting other beads. So the ship of state becomes utterly chaotic. Everything's upside down, so it becomes like Alice in Wonderland. So in that scene, that's what you got. That you had a person who was running away from her emotions. She was definitely not going to look at them for whatever reasons, because of her own past or because of her own relationships, and mostly it is to do with the relationship with the self. The person starts suffering tremendous anxiety. That anxiety prevents them from working right, so then you have stress at work because you can be professionally compromised. And therefore, once stress builds up, it's a feedback loop. You never seem to be able to get out of the loop. And of course, don't we know about approval? Seeking approval from other people is one of the most stressful things that could possibly be imagined. Living up to the false models that society is demanding. So before we even fail to live up to it, which is one syndrome of problematics, we're even trying to live up to it, which is already the first problem, that you even spend your whole life in comparison and trying to live up to these unbelievable, fake models that people are putting up there for us in regards of professionalism and status and looks. I mean, all the way down the line, they're waving this stuff in front of us. And then the more pernicious result is that when we find that we can't live up to these, we don't say, well, that lets me out. I'm free then. I don't need to be doing this. I'll just be as I am. No, we become neurotic people because it's the superego, it's the conscience within us that puts so heavy demands upon us that the little ego in the end just can't do it and then feels terribly, terribly browbeaten in exactly the same way as some overseer, punishing you at work. You're not good enough. You're not good enough. You're not good enough, or some sort of father figure or some very punitive voice. We all carry that voice around in our heads. And so after a lifetime of that kind of, punishing voice within our mind, which again is technically our conscience, and the sense of guilt that we live under, we can't handle it. So there's a break. The human being becomes neurotic. And then if you're neurotic, you can't function in society. So society, knowing that more and more people are becoming neurotic, it's not just something of the last 10 years, it's many decades old now. They then prescribe these pills. That's what they are. They're just the happy drug manufacturers. They're the harlequins, the Pied Pipers who come along to fix you from the outside. But what this does, of course, is it might make you conform to a certain model. It might bring you so far out into the surface of yourself that you're totally estranged now from your unconscious. You're estranged from who you are as a true human being. You've completely lost your purpose. You're totally a conformist. And only the closest people around you are going to notice that you're hollow and that there's something missing. And that is, again, a definition of the self-murdered person. But their satori, their bliss, comes from the fact that now they are the perfect worker. Now they are the perfect robot. Now they are the perfect, participant. The perfect slave. The perfect number. Like Patrick McGowan showed in The Prisoner. You have now learned to conform. You've now learned to perform as the world sees you, and everything that's being created today, that's basically what a new world order is. That's what the global community is in its essence. Even if we forget about who's creating it and what kind of evil is motivating them, that kind of, and we've seen it in science fiction. We've seen it in portrayed in many science fiction and other futuristic films, that in that sort of Orwellian conformist dystopia, and believe me, it's not going to be a utopia because it's impossible for demented people to inherit anything positive. So this is just total fiction, pipe dreaming. As we said in a previous interview, they always talk about order because that's the last thing that they really have inside. And so it's all rhetoric. It's all propaganda. It's not an order. It doesn't even look like an order. Hierarchy is ultimately not order. Hierarchy is a violation of the true order, but if you don't know that the true order exists, and if you've never happened to study hierarchy and you don't know how the nature really functions, well, then you're going to be so conditioned by what man has created, what the scientists are saying, and all these ancient, useless models of the universe and of how we participate, that of course you're going to see hierarchy there, because that's, it's like Vernon Howard, the American philosopher. He said, the man who does not understand what it means to be under psychic hypnosis is already under it. And that is an extremely profound statement, and it solves, it makes a lot of sense when you look around the world. Then what you were talking about is the idea that the society, in order to give us this conformity, are very adept at throwing up the various people's champions. And in the DVD, we didn't have time to explore them all, but certainly the politicians, and then we also explored in the pop culture. And the pop culture is very important because that also deals with the youth, and the youth are very impressionable. The youth don't want conformity, of course, this is just because their energies are over the top, so they are looking for rebellion, they're looking for iconoclasm. And therefore, it's very vital that the society, the controllers, put up false models of that, because the last thing they really want is a true revolutionary, a true, Malcolm X type of person who's going to totally go against the system and really try to do some fundamental changes. That is the last thing that they want. And they've had people like that rise up, and they've known the danger that it can potentially have, and therefore they put their own Pied Pipers up there with the image, the fashion of being radical, rebellious, and different. 5 minutes later, they're up at Buckingham Palace, at Prince Charles's birthday party, or they're down on their blinking knees. We already talked about how it's reprehensible for an American to do that, but even leaving that aside, you'll find these pop culture people 1 minute with their designer, beards and their long straggly hair outside 10 Downing Street, browbeating the Queen or browbeating, the Prime Ministers, and the next minute they're receiving the highest awards of the land from those kinds of people. Is there something wrong with this picture? Anything right with a picture of the punk movement wearing the hammer and sickle T-shirts and earrings and piercing themselves and having these ugly pictures of the Queen with her ears pierced and everything like that helps vent a whole culture, a subculture's pent-up frustrations, and the music, of course, helps to do this. And the next thing you find is that these people are living like pashas in Bel Air, and fleets of Harley Davidsons and whatnot, and receiving awards and working for charities all over the world, and shaking hands with prime ministers and presidents, and owning corporations, for goodness sake. Does anybody ever want to wake up and find out what on earth is going on here? This seems to happen as a matter of course. And that even other whistleblowers from within the music business who come out and tell you what's going on, you don't hear it, you don't believe it. So we've got something off here. And it's very important then to look at all the different ways in which this particular cult of Dionysus, because again, this is not a new thing, this is a very old thing. You not only have the king and the heads of state, but you've got the jester. And you've got the person who's the entertainer. And you've got the person who, the sophistry, the sophists, who go out there, and because the people are not sophisticated, you have the dumb show. This is the propaganda of the ancient world, in which the minstrels and the bards and even the plays were put on to sort of mimic what was going on in the court. Well, that's what you have today. They know you're not going to get it intellectually. They know nobody reads, so they insinuate the media and certain popular figures with this information that they want to have disseminated. And the expertise, you see, of MTV and of PBS, again, we were just talking earlier about this righteous indignation. Well, that's where you need to go when you have righteous indignation. Just watch PBS, then you'll be very happy. You'll be in your element. And these are marvelous people, people for dumbing it down and spreading it thin and putting it out there and basically disseminating this lie in an extremely sophisticated way. It varies, of course, based on media group, and it varies based on even country, but that's what it is. It's the old Sergei Eisenstein, Vladimir Lenin, Soviet understanding of use the media, use the people's champions to dumb people down. And this is the kind of thing that you have going all over the world. There's been many movies that have brought this out as well, about how this particular game works.
Another thing that you pointed